Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And this is episode number 102 of the EdTech Situation Room podcast on August 8th, 2018. And joining me, as always, good evening, Dr. Wes Fryer. How are you?
I am well. I apologize for our late start, which we can attribute to having some challenges with sleep, getting back into the swing of things after a week off. But it was a delicious week in the mountains of Colorado. We fortunately were not around any fires, and yeah, it's good to be back. I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School here in Oklahoma City, and we just had some massive rain last night, and we're glad that, we're not facing a bleak and dry summer. So are you guys having a delightful Missoula summer so far?
We are. It's a little hazy outside, and we actually think that's from California wildfires that tend to make smoke sometimes appear up here. I took a look at the map last night, and there are a couple of small fires in northwestern Montana that are relatively small, under 500 acres. So we are supposed to get a high temperature tomorrow of 106. Ooh. So I estimate that's probably not the best for us in regards to the fire season, but so far so good. A year ago at this time, it was extremely thick smoke here for almost a month, actually, before finally some rains in September had cooled things off enough and put out fires to where it was not a huge deal. So we're very hopeful and keep our thoughts towards clear and hope we can make it through the fire season without, experiencing what folks in California are experiencing right now.
Absolutely. Hey, shout out to Peggy George, who is live in our chat room. And sorry about the late join there, but glad you can be with us, Peggy.
Well, Wes, lots of news. We took a little hiatus last week as you were off-gridding, and as it turns out, the news churns on without us. So we have lots of interesting things to talk about. I do want to do a quick update from a story we reported on 2 weeks ago on the podcast that in kind of this week in Mac hand-wringing, there was a situation with the newly released MacBooks that the i9 chip, which is the new super fast chip that Intel has released for both laptops and desktops, an i9 chip had been put into a MacBook Pro, but unfortunately there was some proof that the system was throttling itself due to heat and was much, much slower than its advertised speed. And what's interesting about that, and I think the story does refer to this, is that the gentleman that had reported on the story was a YouTuber named David Lee, and he had faced some criticism for his video. A lot of people responded that was normal and that was something that he was overblowing, but as it turns out, Apple released a patch for their new MacBook that turned on a key, and it's really interesting because it kind of gives you insight on how complex hardware is in 2018, but apparently they hadn't released a security key which turned on the appropriate turbo boost speeds on the processor itself, and once they released that firmware update, they were able to achieve those speeds without it slowing down due to heat dispensation. And so I wanted to report that as we do spend some time kind of joining in the Mac hand-wringing here on the podcast, but it turns out that the super fast chip that's selling for a premium price is indeed super fast. So, Wes, does this mean you will go out and buy the MacBook with Retina with the i9 chip in it?
No, I will not. Continuing to enjoy the, year or two old MacBook with USB-C only, but I'm really looking forward to October. Of course, the rumors are always flying, but right. I'm looking forward to the updates, which are supposed to be substantial. So I'm going to try and stave off the voices of those that want to have an upgrade at school, prior to that, because I always think it's good to wait in October, see what you're going to get. You're either going to get something faster, or maybe you're going to get the same thing you could get before, but you get it cheaper. So no, I will be holding off on that purchase.
Yep. And I have an older MacBook Air at work that I sometimes dig out, and it's still a pretty solid machine, but obviously not the quality of the recent MacBook Pros with Retina displays. But One other piece I also want to jump on here that I think is also very interesting that's happened in the last couple of weeks. We've talked about this in the past in the podcast, but for those of you that do not know this, Flash will die in 2020. That's not an estimate; it's a fact. Adobe and Facebook and Google and Apple and Mozilla and all the major players in web-based properties have joined together to announce, this was 2 years ago, I think, that Flash will die in 2020. And the reason why I mention that is because there was an excellent story in the website Bleeping Computer on July 25th that talked about how Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who's generally considered to be the most tech-savvy senator in the United States Senate, has introduced an issue via letters to government agencies saying that they really need to focus on getting all the Flash content off of their websites by August 1st, 2019. And he cited the 2020 end-of-life date for Flash, saying that if it's critical in any way at all, we really need to get that off of there now. And the reason why this stood out to me is that there's a surprisingly large amount of Flash content, and we're not just talking about poorly maintained old websites or web-based games, which there are tens of thousands of Flash-based games that are pretty unlikely to get updated to an HTML5 technology in light of how they were created. We're talking about legitimate information sites, and for us at the State Virtual School in Montana, we still do have some legacy content that needs to be updated that has Flash in it. And we, luckily for us, the Mozilla browser, so Firefox, Google Chrome, already generally keeps Flash off, and so we get support tickets from students that can't access content, and that finds the little pieces in our system that still maintain Flash so we can rid itself of it. But it's something that, people are calling it kind of a mini a Y2K or a mini XP end-of-life situation, because those are both things that kind of snuck up on us, but only through preparation we're able to get through those two situations. But I do think the web changes a little bit in 2020 because of this. And for those of you that maintain websites at all, or have digital content, or are using legacy content, there's a decent chance that this may significantly impact you. So, Wes, are you noticing anything regarding the transition that seems to be happening away from Flash and towards HTML5?
Not really. It's pretty rare. I mean, we did have some different science interactives that one of our high school science teachers a year or so ago, was using, and with Chromebooks, and I think it was maybe Shockwave, because Shockwave is still different than Flash, or is it? It's not the same thing, is it?
Yeah, it's different, although that's an older technology that you need to have a plugin that is not been security updated. So yeah, we had some Shockwave stuff as well.
Yeah. So I mean, but it's fairly rare. So, but yeah, I'm glad to see people highlighting that, and it is important for people to know, as of today, that Flash is still supported on Chrome. It's inside the browser on a Chromebook or the Chrome browser that you might have on your Mac or your PC. You just have to decide if you're going to leave it at the default setting, which is to enable it on a case-by-case basis, or you can actually whitelist websites that just approve Flash, content. So anyway, it is on the ropes, but still out there, and it's not something that is unusable when you have Chrome or Chromebooks. But it's not. I guess it's just, it's one of those development things. It's like baby duck syndrome, right? Is when you get imprinted with something and you love it and use it. And folks that have loved Flash and love developing in Flash, I mean, just really reluctant. And I understand that, man. I mean, if you learn a language, it's like saying you can't use English anymore. You're going to have to, just talk in Chinese. I mean, it's a big deal to have to completely, I guess, switch a development language that you're going to have. So it's a reminder. And I think we're probably just interacting with more HTML5 content, and thankfully, beneficiaries of folks embracing more open web standards, which we're going to hopefully continue to do. We've had some articles we've talked about as far as the fracturization of the web and whether things are going to be closed off, et cetera, et cetera. But open standards are sure important, and I'm pleased that where we are with web standards and with regard to Flash and all that. So shout out to the late Steve Jobs, right? Because it was really Steve that got out his nails and hammer and pounded those in the coffin of Flash to really put it down.
Well, and he was significantly criticized for that too. There was a lot of folks that even though I thought he spoke a lot of logic and truth about the fact that it was killer for mobile because of how terrible it was on battery life because of the way Flash is processed on mobile devices. But like a lot of other decisions Apple has made to move on from something else, they're taking a pretty significant kick in the teeth over their decision to get rid of ports other than USB-C on modern day MacBooks. And I have to say, now that I carry around a USB-C laptop and I have a USB-C phone, I mean, I'll never go back. Like, there's no reason for me at any point to go back, because I think that one thing Apple's been really great about is they see the future generally better than most tech companies.
In our chat room, Peggy George has asked a great question relating to Flash, involving announcements that you need to update your Flash player and whether or not those should be ignored or those should be utilized. I mean, generally we want to run updates and keep our devices secure, but we'll talk tonight about phishing and some cybersecurity type issues, and that is a very common type of prompt. Need to update Flash, need to update such and such on your computer, or click here. My parents, actually, my dad had his laptop completely compromised. Is a very classic recording from my mother on a Sunday. Call as soon as you can. Your dad's computer has been taken over by Russian hackers. And, they actually called the phone number. They didn't send any money, got it shut down. I was up there 2 weeks ago, got it all restored. And we don't know exactly what it was that he clicked on, which compromised his machine. But yes, you want to be very wary of that. And I would just encourage people to generally use the updaters that are inside your computer. If you can buy an app from an app store on the Mac OS App Store, just like your smartphone, that is going to be a safer mode in general. There's always going to be, things that can trip you up, but that's why we see the influence of the smartphone and the tablet, coming to the desktop operating system, because it's a good model as far as security goes. There's certainly continue to be differences between the Android ecosystem and the Apple ecosystem in terms of how well it's gate kept and how much malware, et cetera, or how little malware, end up getting in there. But be very wary of the update messages. And, like I said, as we'll talk about, we've talked about before on the show, hackers are very savvy, making things look very authentic and legitimate. And you should not use that as your litmus test of whether or not we should click on this. Really go to the source, and either that is your updater inside your operating system, or, in this case, it would be Adobe, who releases Flash and has the official links to be able to update their software.
I have one other piece of tech advice there as well. The other thing I do, and I do this with parental computers in my life, is that there's a really great installer called Ninite, I think is the name of it, Ninite, and I've been using this for a number of years now. And unfortunately, there's no real great Mac equivalent. There are Mac equivalents out there, but it's not nearly as elegant or as smooth as Ninite. But it's a great program where you can go to ninite.com, and it allows you to pick one of probably nearly 100 programs that are common installs on new machines. But the great thing about the software is that you can choose various things that are commonly you're being begged to update, and it will update it for you. But you can keep that file downloaded on your computer and go back to it later and go catch the newest version of all that software. So I like this for when I'm providing family tech support, because I can just keep this on my parents' desktop and either ask them to click on it once or twice a month, or if I'm remoting into those machines, I can do that as well. So that's another way that you can help keep that updated. And I would also say at some point Wes and I are going to have the grand defense of Chromebook episode, right? But the thing that's one of the reasons why I really love Chromebooks, not just for me as a power user, but for end users, and I think they're kind of the ultimate parent computer. If you can move the older users away from the notion of downloading software and think of it as largely a web piece, or if you have a modern one, the Android apps, but there's just no problems with that on a Chromebook, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's kind of a magical platform.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to take us to an article that has to do with some censorship on the part of our major social media technology companies, which takes us into some interesting waters, but I'm honestly really glad to see. This was from Ars Technica on August 6th. It's an op-ed, and it was titled, "Alex Jones is a crackpot, but banning him from Facebook might be a bad idea." I actually disagree with the thesis here. Part of what the author is saying is that, if you ban something, you draw people's attention to it, maybe you make them more popular. But if you're not familiar with Alex Jones, good for you. He is an incredibly just toxic and extreme voice in the news. And I remember probably a few years ago, just flipping through, radio channels, scanning through stations, and hearing this guy going, "What in the heck is this? How is this guy even on the radio?" But his website is InfoWars, and that's what they're concerned that, hey, maybe more people are going to come to him. But he's just any conspiracy theory possible that you could jump on. And some of the ones, the Pizzagate, which is, was that Hillary Clinton and other Democratic legislators in Washington were running a pedophilia ring out of a basement of a pizza joint in DC, which was totally, didn't have any foundation at all. The idea that, what are they called? Not character actors, but that, students and actors that were hired were the ones that, were at some of the school shootings.
Right, crisis actors is the term they use.
Yes, crisis actors, etc. So, Mark Zuckerberg, as he's testified before Congress and faced the music as it were, has been asked by our legislators and journalists as well. What about banning InfoWars? So really interested. Well, so what happened was, I think Apple was the first to go ahead and ban maybe 5 of the 6 podcasts that they have. And then YouTube followed suit. His account is completely taken down now. And then Facebook also banned 4 of the main pages that he uses to share content. So Facebook, it's in another, I think it was either in this article or another one, saying, they had 2 ways of addressing the quote fake news issue. Rather than an outright ban, they were using their algorithm to de-emphasize in the news feed the importance of content that was being shared from particular sources. It certainly is a more confrontational approach for them to outright ban, but they're not doing it on the basis of whether or not something is true or not, because that is, a huge issue. Like, how are you going to do that? And it's not illegal or wrong to be wrong, but some of the terms of use in its content guidelines, which specifically have to do with, oh gosh, I'll get the quote here. It wasn't fake news. It was, having to do with, silence on the podcast line. Posting content that's hateful, pornographic, violates privacy. So it's other violations of their terms of service, not saying it's fake. So, Jason, what are your responses? Surprised to see these news and tech companies actually getting into this kind of filtering?
I am, and I agree. It's a can of worms, right? Like, I think the problem here is that I don't particularly agree with Mr. Jones's stance on 99.9% of things, so I don't personally find much offense to taking him off of the kind of digital airwaves. But I think there's, assuming that it doesn't cross lines in regards to racism or legal discrimination or other things that are clearly in violation of law that our courts have clearly defined as speech that is not protected speech. I think it becomes hard when you're the world's most popular social network, and clearly it's such a big deal that people are considered to be addicted to that network, right? It's engaging in that way. That there's an arbitrary maybe arbitrary third party inside of that company that's deciding what's legitimate or not. And in fact, the other articles that are related to this one is that last week Facebook announced it had taken down some apparent websites, or I'm sorry, Facebook pages and other accounts that were aimed at impacting or influencing the 2018 midterm elections. And like I don't want Facebook pages to impact elections. I don't want there to be devious forces that are looking to further divide the United States along, kind of rough ideological lines based on what we know from the 2016 election. I just think it's hard to define a clear, bright line there between, protected speech and, Wes, you're completely right. Being wrong is not is protected, right? Being an idiot is protected. Being being divisive is protected under almost all versions of First Amendment law. So, at what point does it become dangerous to put those decisions in the hands of third parties?
Great discussion to have in terms of digital citizenship with students, right? Because we do have libel laws, and they're, we've probably heard others, talk about my right to free speech, ends as far as trying to yell fire in the movie theater, right. Or there are limits in terms of how we can exercise our free speech, and there are consequences to our speech. And so it's a fascinating and incredibly relevant conversation to have. And I hope that in the next year I'll be able to find a little bit more time to work on videos and this isn't creating videos at this point. It's really just locating videos that can catalyze discussions about issues like this for students and teachers, being able to show something quick and then having a discussion. So if anybody who is listening has found anything that's really a nice short video that kind of sets up the issues and the topics here, that would be great. That's a digital citizenship project that I would love to help facilitate and be involved with, because I think it's fascinating and it's really relevant. And we don't know yet as a society, speaking of the election issue, how that is going to be transcended. Many of the articles we're reading now, and we've got some in the show notes tonight, talk about, compromises of election systems, ways that different states are looking at digital systems, and, how deep the Russians, the Chinese, other non-state actors may or may not be right now in our systems. And then there's, on top of those kinds of potential disruptions, the spread of disinformation. So we need to be critical thinkers. I think it's a call for education and teaching, Jason. Wouldn't that be a great thing?
Yeah. Well, and how much of this really comes back to that too, right? I mean, I think there's a real argument to be made that part of what makes 2018 complicated is that, it's my social studies teacher hat, and I think I mentioned this before in the podcast. That's what I taught in the classroom. My undergraduate work is in political science and history, and as it turns out, I think the lack of focus on government and civics in the last, really since No Child Left Behind passed in 2001, has been it's part of the reason why these issues are complicated. Because I remember there was a recent debate in Missoula, Montana. We had a debate over the comment sections of our local newspaper, the Missoulian, and I was of the opinion that we just needed to ban comments on the website. Right, there are 1,000 places where you can go and express your opinion. I was tired of opening up the digital newspaper every morning and seeing this terrible set of anonymous comments. And I encouraged our local paper to do one of two things: either force someone to identify themselves using Facebook, which you can still get around, but I find that most people won't or don't. Or second, just get rid of comment sections. And I took a little bit of heat from friends that said that was against the First Amendment. But au contraire, there is no guarantee that you can have a voice on a newspaper. That's not a First Amendment right. The government can't stop you from doing that. Like, the government can't come in and tell the Missoulian to stop them from publishing comments from its readers. But as a private entity, the newspaper can do whatever it likes there. And as a consumer of that newspaper, I felt it was perfectly within my advocacy to say that I don't want to have to read other people's comments on those newspapers. And I think that debate portion becomes more complicated when you don't understand some of the nuances of things like the First Amendment, right?
Absolutely.
And, as it turns out, and having taught government to high school kids, that takes a little while too to work through those nuances. That's not a lecture point. That's a discussion point, right? That takes some kind of banging our heads against hard brick walls because it's complicated to understand. Because the simple approach to it, which the vast majority of high school seniors that I taught in government brought to it, was that you have a First Amendment right to say whatever you want to. And as it turns out, that's quite shy of what the situation is, and you have to be, you have to kind of work through those pieces. So I guess if anything, the bottom line here is that more civics would be awesome in schools.
Definitely. Well, a related article that we've got a whole bunch of them talking about hacks and the ways in which folks can take advantage of or try to take advantage of us and trick us. This is an incredible article. This is from The Guardian on July 24th, 2018, and it's titled "My Terrifying Deep Dive into One of Russia's Largest Hacking Forums." It's by an author named Dylan Curran. And the subtitle is, "I spent 3 weeks studying free hacks, one of the dark web's biggest platforms for hackers, from passports to credit cards. Nothing is safe." Oh my gosh. He's using a translator, which is of course really interesting to translate, because everything here is in Russian. And so you have to justify, why you're going to be joining this Russian community, which is collaboratively sharing its resources so that you can do all kinds of things. It says the categories of the website are varied and well divided: hacker world news, humor, hacking and security; carding, which is stealing credit cards and trying to cash them out on the internet; botnet, which is a network of bots used to steal data and send spam, or it can perform denial of service attacks; electronics; and phreaking. Phreaking is trying to break someone's security network; Brutus, which is software used to crack passwords; DDoS, which is attacks to overwhelm a server; SEO optimization, which actually is a legitimate, not illegal act; programming, web development; malware and exploits; private software; the clothing market, people who use stolen credit cards to buy clothes and resell them; financial operations; documentation like passports, driver's licenses, and citizenship; and then blacklist, a community judicial system. But just incredible. A number of years ago, I was introduced to the term script kiddies, and I think that was probably on the Security Now podcast, which I don't listen to as frequently, but it's one of the Twit Network podcasts. And a script kiddie is somebody who can download a script and be able to, do some pretty powerful and usually malicious things, doesn't necessarily understand all the code and write it themselves. But in this article, it's just incredible what you can download and get. I mean, the whole Apple Store, that looks exactly like the Apple Store. And then you're able to deploy this on your server and, try to get people to click these links and put their Apple IDs in. I was in Target with my family a week or so ago, and we had a teacher actually at school who received a spear phishing email that purported to be from our headmaster. I don't know, have I told the story yet on the show?
I don't think you have.
Yeah. And it went to a number of people at school, but it purported to be him. Said, "Hey, I'm at this meeting. Can't get away. I need an iTunes card." And she actually bought one, copied it, and sent it to him. And then after the first one, thought, maybe I should check on this. And got verification that no, this was not legitimate. And it was a fake, Gmail account. It wasn't our school, domain, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was in Target a couple of weeks ago, there was somebody there who was looking for iTunes cards. And the guy said, "Oh man, I don't even know if we have any more. There's just been so much rampant, issues with those being used and money being sent overseas and everything like that." So it's a little weird to be shopping in Target and somebody's talking about cybercrime and the results of phishing and spear phishing. So anyway, the Guardian article is a bit of a longer read, but it's well worth it. And it opens your eyes a little bit wider to this world out there of incredible hostility online, which a lot of people, we just might dimly peer into, but we don't realize that, oh my gosh, the criminals are more organized and tech savvy than ever before. And a lot of them speak Russian. So, Jason, are you, feel like your eyes are wide open to the perils of the dark web and the dangers that it offers to us and our parents and families?
Well, I have to admit, the reason why I was chuckling there when you talked about script kiddies was that this was 10 years ago when I was still in the classroom, maybe 12 years ago, but we had read an article when we were talking about international finance, international cybercrime, and it was talking about script kiddies, and the article had referred to a message board, and people are being critical of script kiddies that they're not real hackers, and so they call them script kiddie noobs, and noob is a term for kind of a novice or an idiot on the internet. And so all that year, my freshmen would scream script kiddie noob at kids instead of swearing. They would use that as an ultimate insult. I talk with my wife often about our frustration over the fact that our credit card gets canceled every 3 to 4 months, and we get sent a new one, and it's a huge pain in the butt because, of course, it's 2018, and almost everything we do is via an electronic transaction now. So when our credit card gets compromised, it is it's a real problem for us, and we have to then go change everything around. Some stuff ends up getting canceled because we didn't change the right accounts and yada yada yada, and we get frustrated by that because our credit card credit card issuer won't tell us who the compromised company is, because I would stop doing business with them. But the reality is that even the most secure systems on earth do get hacked pretty regularly, and that's part of the reason why, elections and everything we try to put electronically, we have to be really thoughtful about whether we want to make that electronically or not. And we should probably move on to that article now about the notion of voting via mobile app. But I just would say that, this gives us good reason to be very thoughtful about how we do security in schools. Like, let's be very honest here. The vast majority of school data is pretty boring and mundane, right? Like for a middle of the road student that has a 3.2 grade point average, if their grades were hacked into, it's probably not a huge deal, right? But that's exactly the reason why that data is so attractive, I think, because it is mundane, and yet when weaponized, and that's a term that we utilized a year ago when the the national hacking groups who had aimed at a number of school districts, including school districts in northwestern Montana, so much so they shut down those school districts for a couple of days while they sorted through the mess. Like, that means we need to be extra cautious about security. And so utilizing things like two-factor authentication and hardware keys, which I believe is something we're also it's in our links for this week, those are critical. So, there's a lot of people that have relatively little formal background that are serving in IT positions in your districts, oftentimes recruited from teacher ranks. The greatest thing about that crew is that they're extremely research oriented, right? They're not they're not ignorant of the processes. They just don't have any formal background in it, so they have to learn. But those are the pieces we can all work with together in helping your fellow districts out. And if you happen to have some tech savvy here, pulling in neighboring school districts that may be also additionally understaffed, to let them know there are critical things we need to do to protect student data. Even if a data breach isn't quite as terrible as a national retailer losing credit card numbers, it doesn't mean we don't have an obligation to make sure that data is as iron-tight as it needs to be. So, Wes, why don't you talk about that article regarding the mobile voting?
Okay. So this is, I think it's in Florida. We're going to have to do our links. I don't know if we're going to, at some point, have to get a new Google Doc.
Right. It's getting pretty hardcore.
Yeah. Gosh, I've got 29 references to mobile. I don't have to find the article. So it's a person. Well, it's a state that is going to allow. This is very fascinating because they're talking about using the blockchain. So, gosh. And can you find the article?
I'm looking at it here myself.
Drop the article in. So they are going to allow absentee voting via a mobile device, so via a smartphone. And interesting. Okay, there it is. Experts criticize West Virginia's plan for smartphone voting. It's Ars Technica, August the 8th. So West Virginia, not Florida. So the idea sounds great. Let's let people vote on their mobile device. And they haven't explained all the technology that they're going to use. It sounds like they sort of just said, we're using the blockchain, so it's not going to be, something that can be exploited. Blockchain technology is something we've talked a little bit about. It's what underlies, most cryptocurrencies, and it is driven by math and algorithms. And generally, if you use the blockchain, every transaction that happens is going to be publicly documented. So theoretically, if you were able to legitimately verify the identity of individuals, and that's where biometrics and other, kinds of things come into play, or they should, then you would be able to tell that, oh, okay, there's Jason Neiffer cast a vote, and he's not able to cast a second vote. Now, one of the biggest issues is, how do you know that's Jason Neiffer who has cast that vote? So many elections in the United States, as well as other places, although there's probably places that has a lot higher voter turnout than we do. There's a lot of folks that don't turn out. So potentially, if somebody was able to hack the system, it wouldn't be voter fraud in terms of casting 5 votes as Jason Neiffer. It could be casting 5 votes for the neighbors of Jason Neiffer who didn't actually go to the polls or vote absentee in advance. So this article says that there's a growing consensus that, quote, a voter verified paper trail is essential to making the voting process secure and fully auditable. And I think that's fascinating. When we go to our local election spot here, a few blocks down the road at the little mini mall on May Avenue, we've got Scantrons and there's computers involved. I don't know. The operating systems are running. I know the last time I gave blood, they were running Windows XP on these tough books. And I'm like, you guys got plans to upgrade that? Because that's not supported by Microsoft anymore. And they're like, what? And so anyway, the technologies, in state government is, notoriously can be challenged to stay up to speed with things. So anyway, I think that it's interesting to hear about this. There's people that do think the blockchain is going to save our lives. It's being applied, I guess, in healthcare and other kinds of contexts to try to make things more transparent and actually accountable. But as much as I love digital technology, I think I'm with those that say, hey, paper, allows for better auditing. And until we can figure out how to get a handle on these hacks, and this is a huge issue, right? This is a big reason why we need more and more folks in coding and applying their skills for coding. Right. We're just going to continue to see the rise of transhumanism. I'll mention Amy Webb, the futurist, probably in the show, because I've been reading her book. And she talks about, one of the articles tonight is about 2018 being the sort of peak oil time for smartphones. It's the hiatus. In 10 years, she says smartphones are going to be gone. We're going to be using wearables. We're going to have, things in our glasses. We're going to watches. We don't want to be putting more and more technology not only on our bodies, but in our bodies when it can be hacked. And so we're quite a ways away from I think harnessing what will help us, I hope, the power of AI and machine learning to do that. So, yeah, I think we need paper ballots. So, Jason, are you guys casting paper ballots, or, has everything gone digital there in the great state of Montana when it comes to democracy?
We're doing paper ballots here, but I think part of what, and I've talked about this with some other social studies teachers. These are folks that are in the know in regards to government and history. There are ways to utilize the convenience of electronic ballots while still maintaining an auditable trail for later in case there are issues. And that's, as an example, you can use an electronic balloting system with a paper receipt, where it prints you out 2 versions of that receipt. It prints you out a receipt, and it prints receipt out with your full cast of votes for an election judge. It's a more anonymous one, so they can go back and confirm with a paper ballot or with a paper count later. And I think there's, well, with the article we had 2 weeks ago, that a number of states purchased voter machines that had basically open back doors on them that allow you to get into them from the internet, right, without much to do. And there was evidence that at least there were attempts to hack machines in a number of states. And I just, you're not going to find 2 bigger tech guys than me and Wes, right? And we know that it's a trust but verify situation here, right? You just have to think about what's at stake with it. You don't need to do this with every document you put on your phone, but there are reasons to use analog editions of things when the stakes are so high. So put in a mechanism for verification. I don't think that's that controversial, and yet it seems like we continually wring our hands over and over again when we run into these situations. It's not a question of tech yes or tech no. It's, can we find ways to make sure that we trust the outcome of things? Well, sure, we'll just have a paper backup, even if that costs money to do that. Elections are high enough stakes in a democracy, in the largest democracy. I'm sorry, not the largest, the greatest democracy on earth. It seems like that would be pretty common sense for us.
Absolutely. Well, I probably ought to just go ahead and mention the article titles for the Amy Webb references that I just made there. So her article in Business Insider on October 30th, 2017, smartphones will be gone in 10 years, goes into that. She was actually a guest on a recent Twit podcast, which was wonderful. It was an absolutely great wide-ranging discussion about Amazon and the future of retail, but just she has an organization that what is it called? The it's called FTI, which is what the Future Friday Institute. And her book is called The Signals Are Talking. I started to read it last week when we were on vacation on Kindle. Her other article is actually just off of her Medium channel, 235 emerging trends for 2018. That was from back in March of 2018, March 12th, 2018. And we see all these kind of things with the Horizon Report, I think, still comes out, and that's it has a K-12 version and a higher ed version trying to identify trends. And as a futurist, her big thing is, what's a flash in the pan, and then what are dots that you can connect in terms of what is Google with Alphabet and with its different projects, trying to do, and then, how do you position yourself as an organization and or an individual if you can kind of see these trends and see where things are going. So I had not heard of her before, and I'm just loving her book. And it'll probably be a Geek of the Week that I will share a little bit later. Have you heard of her before? Or
I have not. That's new to me.
Yeah. Would it be okay if we talk about guns and 3D printing?
Sure. Actually, that's an enormously interesting topic. Let's go.
Okay, so I think we had this 2 weeks ago, the last show that we talked about. This is an Ars Technica article from August 5th, 2018, 3D printed and CNC milled guns, 9 questions you were too afraid to ask. So the quick summary is we've had some pretty important things happen. It was probably like 5 years ago where this guy that runs Defense Distributed, Cody Wilson, put out the instructions for how you can 3D print an actual gun called the Liberator. And one of the things that's really controversial about this is that these guns are potentially not traceable, and they also can get through, I think, X-ray machines, et cetera. And, there's people in our society who are banned from being able to purchase handguns. And so, this thought that you're going to be able to have anybody in the world, if they, have the right equipment, be able to produce a functional gun. And we're also talking about AR-15s, which are, civilian versions of the M16. And so his company actually makes its money. I think they estimate he's made about $9 million selling these milling machines, which allow you to create an AR-15, which is an M16. And in this article, and then I think some other ones, one of the things that's so interesting about this is it's both a First Amendment and a Second Amendment issue. So the United States federal government originally filed against him saying, this was just like you were exporting weapons to or from Mexico or from, some other country. But they ended up settling, and part of this is saying that code is speech. So that's where it's a First Amendment thing, because he's not actually, exporting guns. It's the instructions for how you can fabricate one. And so if code is speech, as EFF and other groups, promote, we may be in an era where this is going to be reality. Now, states, attorneys general, I think for something like 19 states have filed to try to stop this and to say it's a constitutional issue and a states' rights issue. And so, the federal government can't just do this. States have the right to regulate commerce, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyway, once he put these things out, of course, mirrored sites were created and these things are all over. But There was another article I read that said he's really working hard to become a library, because if he can become a federally recognized library, he will gain access to the technical specifications of every weapon in the arsenal of the U.S. Army. And so then they will reverse engineer that and be able to put all of those weapons, or a large number of those weapons, out in the ether for people to be able to download as well. So he is an anarchist and just rabid, Second Amendment. Everybody, should have access to guns. There should be no limitations. So, wow, Jason, your thoughts on, 3D printing guns? Do you think the state's attorneys general asking you to put on your lawyer hat, which I know you don't officially have, do they have a chance to prevail here, or are we doomed to kind of live in this world where we're going to be able to have our own CNC milling machines and make an M16 whenever we want?
It's the inevitable byproduct of freeing up the manufacturing via 3D printing, right? Like that's the core problem here, right? Like I have no doubt that there's a legitimate debate, a legitimate reason to limit this, because I happen to be I'm a Western leaning left guy, right? So I don't think that I personally do think that. See, I'm talking myself into circles, right? And the whole time I'm like, this is a tech podcast, Jason. Be quiet. But I live in Montana, right? There are guns in Montana. I've shot guns. I hunt once in a while, right? Like it's something that is part of the culture here in Montana. But as a hunter, and I can legitimately say that as a hunter, I do not believe that there's an unlimited Second Amendment right. That it's more of a collective right than is an individual right, and But ignoring my personal opinion, which does not matter in this context, it ignores the fact that that's the power of these technologies, right? I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just saying that they are extremely powerful in disrupting manufacturing, in disrupting supply chains, and disrupting ownership, and disrupting all the components that really government regulation has in the past been able to enforce, because it was you unless you were a gunsmith, you're not making a gun in your backyard, you're not printing one, or you're not making one in your basement. But if you can download plans from the internet to make, and it doesn't really matter what the X is, right? There's plenty of things that are regulated that beyond guns that could theoretically be 3D printed in 2018, but those are the conversations we need to be having about this, right? And I think it's enormously interesting. I love the way you put that, Wes, that it's a First and a Second Amendment issue, because there are very few things that cross over those two boundaries at the same time, right? But that's one of them. I'm reminded of the situation, is it 15, 20 years ago now, where the DVD encryption code was cracked and released, and the DVD manufacturer sued the snot out of the folks that did that. And one of the ways they made a First Amendment argument out of that was to print it on a T-shirt. And they said, this is speech. You can't regulate speech, right? I'm sorry we cracked this code, but here's all these activists. They're showing up at the Supreme Court with this T-shirt on, and it's the same thing, right? Now that's low stakes. That's commercial, right? It's not a life and death situation, but as it turns out, it's the same issue, right? Like at what point does speech, it certainly isn't what the founders envisioned when they were looking to protect free speech, because speech was a political act. It was political theater. It was political persuasion. It was not, it was not a situation where the physicality of the world was impacted by the speech. And so it's mind-blowing, the implications of this.
It's important, though, too, not to just fall into the trap of the sky is falling. Right. Everyone's going to go print one of these tomorrow, because This article gets into the details about how this is difficult. It's challenging. You do have to have a CNC mill. You don't just, use your
maker bot,
your typical, maker bot with PLA and your, plastic,
right.
That's not how you're making an AR-15. And also the quantity and the price of guns that are available on the market today. I mean, it is far cheaper and much easier to go out and just purchase one of these guns than it is to manufacture it. But the thing is, of course, it's early days. And so these kinds of technologies will continue to mature, and the kinds of home manufacturing capabilities and capacities that we're going to have are just going to continue to increase. So I really just think it's a huge sign of the times. But it also is important for us not to, focus so much on this one example and then, grumble and say, and those 3D printing and those kids, and it's just, the world is just going down the toilet. There's phenomenal things that are being created and done imaginatively with these kinds of technologies. But, it's an example where powerful technologies are going to be able to be used for, unfortunately, really negative and destructive, contexts, and as well as the positive. So I think I would say that they're not going to be successful as far as challenging this. And the cat's already out of the bag. Like I said, there's all kinds of mirrored sites. And if you want to go find these things, we live in a seek and find world, right? For good or for evil. And for folks that want to go do this, it's interesting because this does amplify the availability of it, right? So isn't that a crazy thing that you read an article that says, oh, you can 3D print this, and then someone with an internet connection and a computer, whether they have to get on the dark web via Tor or they just, use Chrome or Firefox, they're able to be able to get access to that stuff. So pretty crazy. Where else do you want to go tonight, sir? Oh,
there we go. So I want to make one other note related to that. Once something's on the internet, it's pretty rare for it to get off the internet, right? Which is part of the reason why this debate is a little silly, because I'm sure right now you could go to one of the many BitTorrent sites that exist on Earth and look for 3D gun code and find it. So yeah, that's part of
that article has links to some of the mirrored sites, so you can link it from The Guardian or whatever.
Yep, done and done.
Yeah.
A couple of quick hits here. This one, it kind of sort of impacts me. Logitech bought Blue, which is the microphone manufacturer that actually manufactured this fabulous microphone that's part of both my home and work podcasting set. This is the Blue Yeti mic, which is a great name for a microphone, big microphone. The only reason why I mention that is because those have kind of always been the high-end consumer microphones, and I don't know if it's good news or bad news that Logitech purchased them. I've actually been very impressed with the general peripherals from Logitech over the last 2 or 3 years. The only thing I would criticize, which is a huge rabbit hole that I will not jump down, is that I wish their mice work better with the Chromebook. But other than that, that's an interesting piece, and I hope that means the price is going to go down of these fabulous devices. And then one other quick hit, the BBC reported that, this is a British statistic, but I'm sure that's got to be mirrored elsewhere, that for the first time, voice calls have dropped in the number of minutes per month. And there's two things that I find interesting there. The first one is that that voice calls hadn't dropped before this point, right? Like, I hate talking on the phone. Now, my job necessitates it. I have what's called the 3-email rule. If I ever have to reply 3 times to an email, it's time for me to pick up the phone and do this, even though I dislike talking on the phone very strongly. But the bottom line is that we don't, or that's a trend of the times, right? And certainly an interesting piece there. And then one other thing that we could probably talk about maybe down the road as well, and I only mention this because I'm sure it applies to a number of apps. There's a great article from PC Magazine on July 31st that free VPN sites, so those are, free VPN apps in particular, those are virtual private networks, are the ability to kind of tunnel through the internet privately, so that, like, if you're at Starbucks, for example, that someone couldn't sniff out your traffic. And it's becoming less likely to do that in the era where almost every website is secure, but still, the idea is that it's safer to use a VPN. Well, there are dozens, maybe hundreds of VPN apps. Students use them all the time to try to tunnel through district internet that has a significant firewall or content filter on it. But a lot of those apps that claim to be free VPN may provide you VPN services, but they're selling your data to both advertisers and, in some cases, third parties that are building profiles on folks. And so free is hard in 2018 for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons why that might be the case is because the app is free because it's selling your data to someone else.
If you're not paying for it, you very well may be the product.
Absolutely true.
And also a couple quick hits for me. This is from Brian Krebs. Brian Krebs is one of the foremost security researchers Absolutely recommend checking out his book, Spam Nation. Read that a year or so ago. In fact, I think I listened to it on Audible. And the hostility of the Russian hacking world is nothing new. And, Brian Krebs has been reporting on it for quite a while. So 2 recent articles. The first is from July 23rd on his blog, which is called Krebs on Security. It says, Google security keys neutralize employee phishing. So, and I'll read the first paragraph. Google has not had any of its 85,000 plus employees successfully phished on their work-related accounts since early 2017, when it began requiring all employees to use physical security keys in place of passwords and one-time codes, the company told Krebs on Security. So FIDO is a technology that, it's a FIDO Alliance, I guess. It's a standards-based technology. YubiKey is made by Yubico. It's about $20. So these are physical keys that you're using. And, we made the transition last year as a school to 2-step authentication. Most of our teachers are using SMS technology to get that security code. It's still a step in the right direction, but I find this, pretty significant that, relying on text messaging as well as app-based code generators is not nearly as good as having a physical device. And so related to that is his article from August 1st, Reddit breach highlights limits of SMS-based authentication. And there was a hack of the website Reddit, a data breach, and it had to do with some of its authorized account holders somehow, even though they had 2-step verification turned on, being phished and being hacked. And so they didn't report how the SMS codes for the 2-factor were stolen, but they talk about 2 common scenarios. One's called a SIM swap, where the attacker pretends to be the user and calls the T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, whatever, and pretends to have a new phone with a different SIM card that switches over. And then the other one is a number port. It's called a port out scam. And so again, they call the provider and pretend, hey, I've switched to a different company. Can you go ahead and port my number? And in either case, then they end up in control of that cellular number, and then they can, when the codes are generated, then they can hack. And so that is actually an example of spear phishing. We're talking phishing with a PH. And so general phishing is when, messages are sent out saying, hey, log in here to verify you've got a package at school and whatever. And it's really going to one of these fake sites that is going to copy and suck up your information versus giving you actual access to Google or whatever you think you're logging into. Spear phishing is what I described, like where somebody's pretending to be a specific individual, and then they're, being able to, have a targeted attack and then get control of that person's credentials, et cetera. So pretty interesting. And I guess just the good news is we've got researchers like Brian Krebs continuing to highlight this stuff. So I don't think that means we shouldn't be doing 2-step security, but if we want to be more secure, rather than using SMS or even an app-based authenticator. I've been using Authy, AUTHY, for a while, and it's cloud-based, and I really, really like it. The best thing would be to have a physical key. So.
Yep. And I just would note that there is I think that article's in this week. Google had announced that they hadn't been hacked in not a single Google employee had been hacked in 18 months, which is, even for a tech savvy crew, is pretty impressive with the numbers of Google employees. And it was a physical key that made the difference for them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm a little leery of that myself, not because it's not secure, but because if I lose that, it's not good, right? So I'm all in on 2-factor, and usually I use an app over a text message as well for the reasons you stated, Wes. But and I feel a lot better about it. Like, not all my passwords are perfect; they're pretty good, and I'm getting to the point where they're unique. By the way, I was caught up in the. I don't know if you read this last week, but it's not Dig, it's Reddit. Reddit had passwords that from 2007 that were hacked, and I was contacted and said, your password from 2007 was hacked, and it, I don't really remember what my password for Reddit was in 2007, but I'm guessing it was one of maybe 6 or 7 of them that I use pretty regularly. And so I've been continuing to go through and try to create a unique password for every site. I use a password manager manager. LastPass is my password manager, and two-factor authentication and everything that matters, and yada yada yada. But you have to be a little obsessive about it, but I do think it's worth it in the same way that it's probably a bigger risk than if you leave your door unlocked at home, right? So if you're obsessive about that, then you should be obsessive about passwords and keep your data secure.
I just went to the website. I'll put it in the show notes. Have I been pawned? Which is a way that you can put in your email address and just check to see if your email address, and it'll tell you if your password as well or whatever has been hacked. And so I put in, I knew that my own personal Gmail account had been involved in multiple ones, but my work one had not. And now, yes, it's been involved in 2, including one that was in June 2018. The marketing firm Exactus leaked 340 million records of personal data. So compromised data included credit card status information, dates of birth, education level, email address, ethnicity, family structure. That doesn't say password, but oh gosh, there is just so much information. I think that's a grand challenge without actually entering the witness protection program of a nation state. How could you start over with your digital identity? Is it possible to do?
Well, and looking, I'm going to check my work one in a second because it's 8 years old now. But I just checked my personal one. Adobe, B2B USA, which is a spam house, Bitly, Boxy, Coupon Mom. I can't imagine why it would be. I would have logged a Coupon Mom. Apparently, I did. Discus, Dropbox, Edmodo, Elance, Exploit.in, Gawker, Kickstarter, LinkedIn, these are all the places my thing has been hacked. Patreon, Quinn Street, which I've never heard of, Ticketfly, which I have, including, it looks like my personal address, my website activity, passwords, email address, passwords, geographical location. Yeah, you gotta be careful out there, kids.
Well, Peggy has said it's unfortunate we miss a week because there's just too much tech news in a regular week, much less when we skip a week. So we did start just a little bit late, but I suppose we probably better wrap up. So you want me to Geek of the Week it, or would you like to take the
let me do it now, and then you can send us out for the week. So I am in the market for a handful of Chromebooks for a special application for my work, and I want to share along a Chromebook provider that deals with government and education. I've been really impressed with them so far. We haven't approached them about our small Chromebook project, but Promevo is they call themselves a premier Google seller, Google consulting group. But what I love about them is they have a really great social media presence, and their videos are outstanding. They do reviews of all Chromebooks, and in fact, I keep an eye on their YouTube channel because that's how I learn about a lot of new Chromebooks that are out there, and they do speed testing on it, durability testing, and it's pretty great stuff. But they are a premier Chromebook provider. You can buy from them, white glove service or Google Apps for Education. Google Suite for Education, licenses for individual devices. And so if you're looking for a premier group, that's a great place to go. And there are lots of wonderful places that do this service, but I've been impressed with them particularly because of their social media presence.
Awesome. And I just have one Geek of the Week. This is a pretty amazing one. It's called Explorables Snippets of Complexity. And it's put the Twitter ID, Dirk Brockman is the author of it. And so the blog is complexity-explorables.org. /explorables. And so it's a collection of interactive explorable explanations of complex systems in biology, physics, mathematics, social sciences, epidemiology, ecology, and other fields. So, the one that I saw was this most recent one from August 6th. It's called I Heard You. 4 models explain how immunizations affect you. And so you can press play and then adjust the transmissibility and the vaccine uptake in a population. And you can look at different kinds of models. It is just fascinating. And I'm really drawn to ways in which technology can make the invisible visible. And it can allow for, complexity to be better represented and understood, and things like this that essentially are like digital manipulatives, so that you actually have the ability to modify variables and then see what effect that has on the interaction that's taking place. Incredible. So check it out, Explorables. So I am Wes Fryer. You can find me at W Fryer on the Twitters. Blog is speedofcreativity.org. I've taken the last of the summer vacations and fully back into the swing of things. We have teachers coming back next week for a full week of meetings, and then school will, I think, be starting on the 22nd. So I will probably be working a little more than usual as we, gear up for the week at school. So, Jason, are you still the tech savvy teacher in residence for NCCE?
As a matter of fact, I think technically the tech savvy administrator in residence now.
That's right.
We have a tech savvy teacher and tech savvy librarian as well. But that is true. I offer professional development through the Northwest Council for Computer Education, where I am the tech savvy administrator in residence, and I blog there at blog.ncce.org. And in fact, they're about ready to release a huge trove of trainings in upcoming weeks and months. So follow NCC on Twitter, Facebook, or go to the NCC website, ncc.org/professional-learning. And I'm also the assistant director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school that provides services to students across the state of Montana through their local public school. I'm on the Twitters as well at Tech Savvy Teach, where I post, it's 5, 10, 15 articles a week that are crossing my cell phone or tablet, and I like to share that to help kind of add to the conversation. This whole action here, though, is not any of those things. This is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a weekly podcast that talks about tech news through an educational lens. We are here almost every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central, and I believe that we had decided that was 3 a.m. UTC or something along those lines. If you can't join us live, and we hope you try sometime, we love to have an audience. Thank you again to Peggy. Then you can always download this at our website, edtechsr.com, or you can see releases on Twitter. EdTechSR is our Twitter handle, or you can find us wherever finer podcasts are aggregated, which includes Stitcher Radio. Pocket Cast is my preferred provider. We're there. The Apple iTunes podcast directory contains us, and we're also on Google Play and Spotify. So feel free to find us in any of those locations, or download the podcast directly from the website. So we hope to see you on a future episode, and stay safe, stay savvy, and have a great day.
Adios.